Naitwa Frida Kairodhi, kutoka Meru County, mahali inaitwa Gyaki. Mimi nafanya ukulima wa mahindi na sorghum, na pia nafuga kuku, nafuga mbuzi. Hapa ni mashambani. Bila internet unaweza kuwa mbali sana na hii maisha ya kisasa, kwa sababu
मोबाइल ने हमारी लाइफ को चेंज करके रख दिया। हमने अपना सिलेबस भी मोबाइल इंटरनेट से मंगा के देखा और समझा सेकेंड ईयर का, और कोई भी टॉपिक अगर हमको नहीं समझ आता था तो हम लोग यूट्यूब पे जा कर के उस टॉपिक को समझते थे। और क्योंकि सर थे नहीं, कॉलेज बंद हो चुका था कोरोना के दौरान, तो मोबाइल ही हम लोगों की बहुत मदद किया। मोबाइल से हमने बहुत सारी स्किल्स को एक्सप्लोर किया, जैसे कि वीडियो एडिटिंग करना, वॉइस एडिटिंग करना, वीडियो मेकिंग करना। हमने बहुत सारे नए नए डिज़ाइंस बनाने सीखे, जैसे कि ऐप्स के माध्यम से, जैसे कैनवा एक ऐप है, वो सब चीज़ें हम लोगों ने एक्सप्लोर किया मोबाइल में ही।
COVID-19 තත්ත්වය ඇත්තටම අපේ ව්‍යාපාරවලට බොහොම නරක විදිහට බලපෑවා. මගේ ව්‍යාපාරයත් ඇත්තටම කඩේ වහන තත්ත්වයටම සිද්ධ වුණා. ඒ වුණාට මට ජංගම දුරකථන ක්‍රියාකරු හරහා ඇත්තටම මගේ ව්‍යාපාරයට ලොකු උදව්වක් ලැබුණා. මොකද මට ගෙදර ඉඳගෙන මම මගේ ව්‍යාපාරයේ ගේ ඇතුලේ ඉඳගෙන, ඒ කියන්නේ මට WhatsApp, එතකොට messages, අය වගේ phone.
Karena dengan adanya internet seluler serta banyaknya aplikasi yang mendukung kita untuk bisa berkomunikasi dengan keluarga kita yang jaraknya jauh, itu kita bisa melaksanakan seperti via chatting, via video call, serta masih banyak cara lainnya.
Alafu kwa samba, kuna wakati hii amewamu ilikuja ikavamia mtama wetu na pia mahindi, tukapiga picha kwa internet na tukaletewa ndawa।
তো পার্সোনালি আমার মনে হয় এই সময়টাতে আমার মোবাইল ইন্টারনেটটা আমাকে আমার জীবনটাকে অনেক পরিবর্তন করে দিয়েছে। আর আমি এখন হচ্ছে গিয়ে নিজের লাইফের ক্ষেত্রেও মোবাইল ইন্টারনেটটাকে কাজে লাগাচ্ছি। কিভাবে? তো খাবার দাবার তৈরি করার সময় আমি কিছু ইউটিউব থেকে উপকরণগুলো দেখে আমার কাজের সুবিধা করতে আমি যেন ঠিকঠাকভাবে আইটেমটা মেনুটা তৈরি করতে পারি, তো আমি ইউটিউবের হেল্প নিই।
Wakati wa corona mamangu alikuwa mgonjwa, na tukapata go through the internet, tukapata online doctor na tukapata kumtibu na akapata nafuu. Mimi kama mfanyabiashara, kasi internet sijui saa hii ningekuwa wapi, juu imenisaidia sana. Kiki zangu ziko sawa, hata mapishi yangu iko sawa.
दुनिया मुट्ठी में अगर आपके पास मोबाइल है तो पूरी दुनिया को बदल सकते हैं, दुनिया से कनेक्ट कर सकते हैं।
Kuwa na internet imekuwa imenisaidia sana kama mkulima. Tuseme wakati wa mvua inakuwa ujui, tuseme mvua itanyesha lini, lakini tuseme ulikuwa umeandika hata kama ni mahindi yako nje ama ni mtama, unaingia kwa hizo apps za weather, unasoma, unajua tuseme saa fulani itanyesha. Kama ulikuwa na kitu nje unaweza niweka kwa nyumba. Sasa imekuwa imetusaidia tu sana. Mimi naitwa Frida, niko hapa Meru na ninaweza connect na ulimwengu mzima thanks to internet.
Hello everyone, and a really warm welcome to the launch of our Mobile Gender Gap Report 2022. It's great to have so many of you joining us today from all over the world. Please do share where you're joining us from in the chat box, as it would be great to hear from you today. So I'm sitting here in London, and I was here a year ago hosting the launch of our last Gender Gap Report. And despite being 1 year into the COVID-19 pandemic at the time, we actually had quite a good news story to tell about women's digital inclusion. Unfortunately, today the story is not so positive. And this is such a shame, given how mobile phones can really transform women's lives. And we saw that just now in the video. You might not have picked it up, but Frida from Kenya and all the other women that you saw actually used a mobile phone to make the original videos themselves. And I find their stories really, really heartwarming. They show us how mobile phones have supported their lives and their businesses and their families, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic. And in fact, across all low and middle income countries, mobile phones are the most common way and often the only way that people access the internet, and especially women. Right now in these countries, 84% of women own a mobile phone and 60% of women use mobile internet. But these figures are much lower than they are for men. Currently in these countries, 89% of men own a mobile phone and 71% of men use mobile internet. And this is what we call the mobile gender gap. And this is what we're going to be talking about today. How big is it? Why is it there? How has it changed over time? And what can we all do to fix it? So I'm excited to welcome a number of speakers today to tell you more about this. First up, I'd like to introduce Mats Granryd, our Director General of the GSMA, to say a few words. Over to you, Mats.
So thank you, Dominica, and hello, everyone. It's so wonderful to be here with you today as we launch this year's Mobile Gender Gap Report. But before we get started, I'd like to take a quick moment to thank UK FCDO and Swedish SIDA for their incredible support and partnerships. This report would not have been possible without them and your support. So why is this such an important report? Well, very simply, all of our goals depend on it. Women, as we know, make up half of the population. And if we want to build stronger organizations and businesses and achieve the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, we absolutely cannot afford to leave anyone behind. We know that when women have access to mobile phones and the internet, they are unstoppable. We saw that in the video just earlier. And when we see stories like this, it is so clear why we must close the mobile gender gap. Now, over the past few years, the mobile gender gap has been steadily decreasing. But this year, unfortunately, we have a different story to tell, and it's a worrying one. After years of progress in closing the gap, we are starting to see things slow down. And in some countries, the numbers are even going in the other direction, reversing. This shows that we cannot take progress for granted, and we must act quickly and decisively to get ourselves back on track. Closing the mobile gender gap has never been more crucial, and I must say that I'm very proud of the work of our operators are doing to contribute to this. Through our Connected Women Commitment Initiative, over 40 mobile operators have made formal commitments to reach more women with mobile internet and mobile money services. And since 2016, they have reached over 55 million additional women. So you can see how acting together, acting decisively, can bring about fantastic results. And I think together is the key word here. This is not just a women's issue. Achieving gender equality is a global issue that affects all of us. So we really need men to stand up too and stand in solidarity with women to create a future that benefits us all. The challenge that lies ahead of us is a big one. But if we work together, I believe that we can accelerate our progress to achieve our goals. So as we continue the session today, I hope that you will listen, engage, and be inspired to take action on this very urgent and pressing issue. And this time next year, I hope we will be back with a much more positive story to tell. So thank you very much for listening, and back to you, Dominica.
Thank you, Mats, for kicking us off today. So next up, I'm delighted to introduce my colleague, Matthew Shanahan, who is Insights Manager at GSMA and lead author of this year's Mobile Gender Gap Report. So our 60-page report was actually launched this morning, and I'm fairly sure that none of you had a chance to read it yet. But fortunately, Matthew will be taking us through the key findings. So please feel free to ask your questions using the chat box throughout today, and our team will try to answer them.
Thank you very much for joining our session today. I'm Matthew Shanahan, and I'll be sharing with you the key findings from our 2022 Mobile Gender Gap Report. Now, the Mobile Gender Gap Report series is an annual report that we've been publishing for the last 5 years, enabling us to comment on trends in the gender gap from across low and middle income countries. The findings in our latest report are drawn from the GSMA Consumer Survey, supplemented by other third-party data and qualitative research that we conducted in India and Kenya, highlighting the impact of COVID-19 on mobile use by women. The survey was conducted face-to-face in 10 low and middle-income countries at the end of 2021, and the survey gathered critical data on the mobile gender gap and allows us to continue monitoring the impact of a pandemic on women's access to and use of mobile. In this presentation, I'll be sharing with you some of the key findings. Here we see how the mobile internet gender gap has changed over the years, including our latest estimate for 2021. We've been tracking the mobile internet gender gap across low and middle income countries since 2017, when it was estimated to be 25%. What this means is that women were 25% less likely than men to use mobile internet. And this gender gap percentage dropped every year through to 2020, where it dropped as low as 15%. And this was good news. However, our latest estimate for 2021 suggested this progress has stalled, with the gender gap in mobile internet use now at 16%. This is the first time GSMA data has recorded this type of negative trend. Last year, we'd seen some early warning signs that things might be getting worse. For example, our qualitative research in Kenya revealed that the economic impact of COVID-19 had been severe, affecting the affordability of mobile and lowering the justification for some women to use the internet. This data is a clear call to action. Progress in closing the mobile internet gender gap has stalled overall across LMICs and even reversed in some countries. Now, we look at the underlying numbers to better understand what is going on. From 2018 to 2020, we can see that more women than men started using mobile internet each year. However, in 2021, the number of additional women almost halved from 110 million in 2020 to 59 million in 2021. Meanwhile, the number of men adopting mobile internet increased more than women in 2021. The widening gender gap we saw on the last slide is not due to women going offline, rather their adoption stalling compared to men. And this is where we are now. Across low and middle income countries, women are now 16% less likely than men to use mobile internet. For context, 60% of women now use mobile internet compared to 71% of men. The gender gap in mobile internet use varies across regions, with the widest gaps in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. There's actually been no notable change in regional gender gaps over the years, except in South Asia, where consistent progress had been driving an overall reduction in the gender gap across LMICs. In 2020, for the first time, the gender gap in mobile internet use in South Asia was on par with Sub-Saharan Africa. However, from 2020 to 2021, mobile internet adoption among men in South Asia continued to increase, while adoption among women plateaued. This has resulted in the mobile internet gender gap in South Asia widening from 36% to 41%. It's worth noting here that India has been a big driver of the closing gender gap over the years, but saw no material increase in the proportion of women adopting mobile internet in the last year, while an increasing proportion of men were adopting mobile internet. In last year's report, we highlighted the remarkable growth in Indian women's mobile internet use. Changing market dynamics over the past few years have made the internet more affordable and, combined with COVID-19 restrictions and lockdowns that drove more women online, had helped to narrow the mobile internet gender gap. In contrast, the proportion of Indian women using mobile internet has remained at 30% this year, whereas the proportion of Indian men using mobile internet has grown to 50%. Now, this is a significant change for a country that had been decisively reducing the mobile gender gap. And it's not only affected India's mobile internet gender gap, but also widened the overall gender gap in South Asia and across LMICs. Despite an initial sharp increase in mobile internet adoption in the early stages of the COVID-19 pandemic, women's mobile internet use appears to have plateaued as the pandemic has progressed and livelihoods have suffered, and to a much greater extent than men. These nuances highlight the complexity underpinning country-level gender gaps. Now, we look at smartphone ownership. We know that smartphones are critical to accessing the internet and reducing the gender gap. Once women own a smartphone, their awareness and use of mobile internet is almost on par with men. Unfortunately, this year, the smartphone ownership story is also not so positive. While the gender gap in smartphone ownership dropped from 21% in 2019 to 16% in 2020, it has widened back out to 18% in 2021, mirroring the stalling progress in closing the mobile internet gender gap. Now, if we want to close these gender gaps, we need to understand what is preventing women from owning a mobile phone all the way through to using mobile internet regularly and accessing its full potential. We use a simple framework to understand this mobile internet user journey, and the gender gap tends to widen at each stage in this journey. So, the gender gap for mobile ownership across LMICs is 7%, where it has continued to remain largely flat, highlighting that those who still do not have a mobile phone are proving difficult to reach. But it is also important to look at what type of handset people own. Women still typically own more basic handsets than men and are 18% less likely than men to own a smartphone. Now, moving on to awareness of mobile internet, following strong growth in both men's and women's mobile internet awareness from 2017 to 2019, awareness levels are still relatively high in most of the survey countries, but growth has slowed, even in countries where awareness remains relatively low, such as India and Bangladesh. In all 10 survey countries, women are still less likely than men to be aware of mobile internet. Awareness remains a significant initial barrier to mobile internet adoption, particularly in India, where half of women are still unaware of mobile internet. In half of the countries surveyed, more than a quarter of all women are still not aware of mobile internet, and by extension, the benefits it could bring to their lives. Despite rising awareness among women, the mobile internet gender gap is still high at 16%, suggesting there are other key barriers stopping women from adopting it. In fact, the mobile internet gender gap is more than double the mobile ownership gender gap. Finally, moving on to regular use of mobile internet, promoting equal uptake of mobile internet is not sufficient to meaningfully close the gender gap. Equal use is just as critical to ensure that women can reap the full benefits of all the services and opportunities that mobile internet has to offer. Overall, both men and women continue to use their phones for a wider range of activities in most of the survey countries, but there is a persistent gender gap. Women tend to use their mobile phones for a narrower range of activities than men on a weekly basis, and it will likely come as no surprise that owning a smartphone substantially increases diversity of use for both men and women. Looking specifically now at the top reported barriers to mobile ownership and mobile internet use, across survey countries, the top barriers that men and women said were preventing them from owning a phone are still very similar, with little change since 2019. These barriers are affordability, specifically of handsets, literacy and digital skills, and safety and security. However, there are variations in the top reported barriers at country level. Our research found that once women are using a mobile phone and are aware of mobile internet, the top barriers preventing them from adopting mobile internet are a lack of literacy and digital skills, affordability, primarily of internet-enabled handsets, and safety and security. These overall rankings have not changed despite the evolving landscape of the COVID-19 pandemic. These are the same barriers for men, but we also see that these barriers disproportionately impact women. And women tend to belong to the groups that are most likely to be unconnected, such as those who are unemployed or have low literacy levels, and are also often affected by social norms, which make mobile ownership and use more difficult. Among low-income groups, there is evidence that the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic has made handsets and mobile internet even less affordable and affected access to smartphones and mobile internet use. Social norms also continue to play an important role. This year, the survey uncovered further information around how these social norms play out with regard to handset acquisition. Across the survey countries, women were less likely than men to have chosen their model of mobile phone, even when they paid for it themselves. Respondents in our qualitative research in Kenya highlighted that the ability to afford a smartphone and data has diminished due to lower incomes, with women disproportionately impacted. Most mobile internet users in Kenya described how, to make ends meet, they had cut their internet use substantially over the course of the pandemic. Although a minority had upgraded to a smartphone, others had downgraded, selling smartphones for cash or being unable to replace lost or broken ones. Women were expected to prioritize other needs first. Now, 4 key points that we'd like to leave you with today are that, first, progress in closing the mobile internet gender gap has stalled, with fewer women adopting mobile internet than men. Concerted efforts are needed to avoid it widening. Second, progress in reducing the gender gap in smartphone ownership has stalled, despite smartphones being critical to digital inclusion for women. Third, men and women are using their mobile phones for a wider range of activities in most survey countries, but there is a persistent gender gap. And finally, affordability, particularly handset affordability, and literacy and digital skills remain key barriers. So, what can stakeholders do to address the mobile gender gap? Our full report provides more specific recommendations for different stakeholders, but here we share 4 high-level actions to consider. Ensure that there is a focus on gender equality and reaching women at an organizational and policy level through senior leaders championing the issue and setting specific gender equity targets. We believe it's crucial for stakeholders to understand the mobile gender gap. This can be done by improving the quality and availability of gender disaggregated data, and by understanding women's needs and the barriers that prevent them from owning and using mobile technology. Unfortunately, this data is currently lacking. Gender disaggregated data is crucial for measuring the gender gap, and it is critical for setting targets and developing strategies, policies, and commercial approaches to address the mobile gender gap and to keep tracking our progress. When it comes to designing and implementing mobile-related products, services, and policies, stakeholders should ensure that women's needs, circumstances, and challenges are explicitly addressed. This includes addressing the key barriers faced by women, as well as consideration of social norms that can contribute to women experiencing these barriers more acutely than men. For example, when it comes to the top 2 barriers mentioned earlier, affordability can be improved by supporting industry to lower the upfront costs of mobile handsets, particularly internet-enabled handsets, which would disproportionately benefit women. And on literacy and skills, invest in education and mobile skills training specifically for women and girls that increases their digital literacy and confidence levels. If stakeholders don't proactively take women's needs and the barriers they face into consideration, they may inadvertently reinforce the mobile gender gap. Finally, collaborate and partner with different stakeholders to address the mobile gender gap. Targeted intervention is needed from industry, policymakers, the development community, and other stakeholders to ensure that women are no longer left behind. COVID-19 has shown us the importance of tracking digital inclusion. Now, more than ever, it is critical that we continue to monitor the impact of the pandemic on the gender gap and use this data to ensure the digital inclusion of women for a better future. Closing the mobile gender gap presents social, commercial, and economic opportunities, and it will ensure that women are not further excluded from an increasingly digital society. Conducting face-to-face research helps us monitor the ever-evolving gender equality and digital inclusion landscape, which, as we have seen this year, is more critical than ever. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Matthew, for taking us through the findings from our report today. We only had time today to share some of the findings, but we actually have data from 10 countries in the report, and I'd really encourage you to take a look at this, as some of the differences between the countries are really interesting. Perhaps somebody from my team could kindly write the 10 countries in the chat box for everyone to see. I'm delighted to now welcome our next speaker, who is a true advocate for gender equality, Seema Sami Bahous, Executive Director of UN Women. Matt was able to catch up with Seema earlier to talk to her about this topic.
Seema, now thank you so much for being here with us today, and it's just wonderful to be talking to you, given all the work that you and the UN Women are doing to improve the lives of women and girls around the world. So I'll jump straight into it, if that's okay, with my first question. UN Women has been spearheading the generation equality movement, including through the action of Coalition on Technology and Innovation. Now, why do you think it is so important that women have access to mobile phones and the internet?
First of all, thank you, Matt, for being here also, and for inviting me, and for this question as well. And allow me to extend my gratitude to you and the GSMA team for the invitation to be here today. This conversation actually is more relevant than ever today, as the world continues to battle the COVID-19 pandemic alongside multiple humanitarian crises, such as those in Afghanistan, in Ukraine, and the Sahel in Africa, which have disproportionately affected women and girls. More mobile connectivity and internet access should be recognized as a fundamental right for all. During turbulent times, connectivity actually is very crucial for ensuring access to information and access to services. So, in line with the Secretary General's our common agenda, we must connect all people to the internet and apply human rights online. For every woman and girl, the goal should be meaningful connectivity. We created the Action Coalition because we know that access to mobile phones and to the internet empowers people, and empowers women in particular, to make the best decisions they can for themselves and for their families. Lack of access to connectivity and technologies, as I am sure you would agree, increases risks to the survival, livelihoods, and well being of women and girls. Yet, I must say, unfortunately, almost half the world's population is still offline, 46% according to ITU. The majority of those are women in developing countries, something which reinforces gender inequalities and undermines poverty reduction efforts across all the Sustainable Development Goals. At the same time, women and girls who have access to the internet are disproportionately exposed to online and ICT facilitated violence and harassment. This online violence is silencing women's and girls' voices, unfortunately, creating an environment in which they are scared, in which they are stressed, in which they feel unsafe and self censoring. It is also shaping their attitudes towards technology. Very often, the abuse and harassment they face when entering the digital world influences how they access and use digital tools for the rest of their lives. So, the Generation Equality Action Coalition for Technology and Innovation for Gender Equality is therefore a crucial tool for UN Women to drive multi stakeholder action and help our partners tackle these problems holistically. Bridging the gender gap in digital access is not something schools, governments, or companies can address alone and in isolation. What we need is the public and private sectors to join forces and to work together towards a common goal, to assure full connectivity for everyone and to cater to those who are not online. So, as a commitment maker to the Action Coalition, we count on your support to continue to mobilize mobile industry partners and to make sure that we reduce the gender gap and that reducing the gender gap is at the core and not at the margins of their business strategy.
No,
I hope
thank
I've
you,
answered
Sim.
your question, Max.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and more. That's great. So I think it is very relevant what you are describing here. Now, if when you have read the report and you've listened to the comments, anything that specific stood out in your world around the gender gap?
First, I would like to again congratulate the GSMA team for the Mobile Gender Gap Report. It is an important knowledge and data resource, no doubt about that. It is also, I must say, deeply concerning that across low and middle income countries, 372 million women are still without a mobile phone. The top barriers to mobile ownership are affordability, literacy, and digital skills, and safety and security. These women do not have access to critical health notifications, agricultural information, weather alerts, financial services, and online commerce, to name just a few. So, access to mobile phones is a pathway to equality, allowing women and girls to access knowledge and vital services, such as I mentioned, health, education, and financial services. The report also highlights that only 59 million additional women in low and middle income countries started using mobile internet in 2021, compared to 110 million in 2020. So we are slowing down when we need really to be accelerating. We know that over 90% of jobs worldwide have a digital component. This highlights how closing the digital divide is a prerequisite for achieving SDG 5. This is especially relevant also for women entrepreneurs in the mobile and tech sectors, since women led SMEs are disproportionately affected by the economic disruptions of the COVID 19 crisis and the aftermath of it. So the report really highlights affordability. Governments and the private sector need to collaborate to facilitate free or cheap access to the internet for those who cannot afford it. We need to see lower data bundle costs, waiving of caps, and additional fees on data usage, and zero rating of important websites. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Seema. I think that is very, very clear, and it's quite concerning. And it's that the rate of progress have basically halved during last year. Now, there is certainly no time to be complacent here, because this is, as you have rightly pointed out, a very pressing issue. If we would take one action out of today, what would that be? What would you, from your point of view, say what is the most important and impactful action that we can do tomorrow to address the gender gap?
Mats, in my experience, partnership and collaboration are key. So we need to work together to harness the power of mobile technology and creativity to transform the lives of all women and girls and their potential for economic empowerment. So we continue as part of the Equals Global Partnerships and Broadband Commission, for example, and we need to continue to work together as part of that. We also need to focus especially on meaningful connectivity and access to mobile devices and frontier technologies. Changing gender stereotypes about women in mobile and tech industries is key also. And equipping women with the skills they need to thrive in today's economy is also crucial. So, the Action Coalition on Technology and Innovation for Gender Equality is working to make sure women and girls have equal access to digital tools, are protected from online gender based violence, and can become the new generation of innovators. So I invite everyone listening today to join us in sparking a fairer and more diverse digital transformation.
Fantastic, Seema. Thank you so much for those very valuable insights. And I hope that everyone that has listening is reflecting on what they could be doing within their organizations to really enable women and their families to gain full benefits of connectivity. And Seema, we look forward to continue our collaboration with UN Women. And it is such an important partnership for us as we keep working together to make sure that women are not left behind in this new age, this new digital age. So thank you again, Seema, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you, Mats and Seema, for sharing your perspective on this hugely important issue. I especially like Seema's point that the mobile gender gap is more relevant today than ever, given the pandemic and the multiple humanitarian crises happening around the world today and how these disproportionately impact women and girls. I would also add the climate crisis to that list as well, unfortunately. And I also totally agree with Seema's point that we all need to collaborate and work effectively together if we're ever going to change the trajectory of how things are going. Now I'd like to welcome our next guest, Doreen Bogdan-Martin, who is Director of the Telecommunication Development Bureau of ITU. We've had the pleasure of working with Doreen for a number of years now. And I'm delighted to hand over to Claire Sibthorpe, head of our Connected Women programme, and she'll be asking Doreen her thoughts on this year's report.
Doreen, it's a real honor and pleasure to have you here at our launch. We're very excited to have you, so thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Claire. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm gonna get going with the first question I wanted to ask you. So obviously you've been following our mobile gender gap reports for many years, and it's been great to be working with you over so many years on this issue. And you're as sort of a strong advocate for gender equality. I'd really love to hear your reaction to this year's report, because the numbers are quite different this year. So I'd love to hear what you think.
Well, first of all, it's always such a great report. I think it's something that policymakers and industry always eagerly look for, because as you know very well, there's just not enough hard data in this area. And I do want, of course, to congratulate GSMA for its continued commitment to really changing the picture and really tracking those needed numbers on the mobile gender gap, because it is vitally important, not just to our work at the ITU, but as I said, governments, regulators, and of course, development practitioners around the world as well, so that we are able to assess where we are and where the gaps remain that are so critical. And that helps us to focus more direct, targeted interventions. I think it goes without saying that women's access and meaningful use of connectivity, including access to mobile services, is key to their participation in social and economic activities. This is only going to increase as digital transformation accelerates around the world. I think some of the key findings of this year's Mobile Gender Gap Report also corroborate some of ITU's own data. And you've confirmed that the gender gap does remain greatest in low-income countries. This points to the fact that affordability is still very much of a key issue and a major obstacle to women being online. That affordability barrier is also often compounded by other issues like cultural and social norms, which combine actually prevent women from having equal access to devices and to connectivity. And of course, in the world's least developed countries, only 1 in 5 women are actually using the internet. And I do think it's a real tragedy that the people who could potentially get the most from the transformational power of mobile technologies are actually those that are the least likely to be able to access it. And I do think that we need to start taking this issue a lot more seriously at the very highest levels of policymaking, and to help put in place some proactive solutions that can help us quickly bridge the gap, because it's really in everybody's interest to do so.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, we really need more focus, and I think this report really does highlight that, as Matt shared just a minute ago, how progress in addressing the mobile gender gap has, as a result of COVID, which is really disproportionately negatively impacting women, has stalled, and in some countries reversed, which is quite alarming. So in this context, I'd love to hear from you, where do you think we should focus our efforts, and how do we just ensure that we don't leave women and girls behind?
So let me start with the where first. So the data shows that the top barriers to internet use are around affordability, the lack of skills, lack of awareness, and I think that chimes with the findings of this year's mobile gender report. We have seen the gender gap, as you just mentioned, shrinking in recent years in some parts of the world. The affordability issue has certainly been exacerbated during the pandemic, especially when we know that women have borne the brunt of the economic impact of the health crisis. So sadly, it does not come, I should say, as a surprise that this report finds that progress in closing the gender gap has stalled or even regressed, as you noted, in some countries. The gap in access to digital tools is also an important factor, something that we need to keep in mind in our discussions and in our policy making. Right now, we see that even in connected homes, that women and girls may not have equal access to online work, to schooling opportunities, because they may be engaged in heavy household and also childcare responsibilities. I think it's important to recognize that owning a mobile phone is crucial to empowerment and also to independence. It's not enough to have shared access with other family members, because women and girls are often the last in line when it comes to getting online. So we do need to address the gender gap in smartphone ownership, which this new report actually shows has widened. So now just turning to the how, to the second part of your question. Empowering women with digital skills has been a major focus area for us. And I'd argue that as a community, we need to continue to urgently scale up on this. At the ITU, we have a lot of gender-focused training activities, working closely with our partners at GSMA, from our annual Girls in ICT Day campaign, our Equals Global Partnership that we co-founded, together with GSMA, where we have over 100 incredible organizations, and we're working to close the digital gap in access, skills, and women's leadership in the tech sector. Our Girls Can Code boot camps and workshops, and also our digital transformation centers have helped to train over 100,000 individuals in basic digital skills, and 65% of them are actually rural women. Our work as well on school connectivity through our GIGA initiative with UNICEF, I think, is another important example, because if we can put the internet in the hands of learners as well as in the hands of educators, we can, of course, help to transform learning and really transform the world. Schoolgirls who otherwise might not have a chance to connect to the online world can do so if they're in a GIGA school. Online safety, I think, is another important component when we talk about access for women and girls, because that online safety issue is often a barrier that keeps women and girls offline because they're afraid of the online experience. And so we do need to do more to make the internet a safer space for women and girls. And these are just some of the efforts that we're working on in many cases together. And of course, we have our Partner to Connect Digital Coalition that we'll be unveiling shortly. And that has a very specific target on digital gender equality as a priority. I did want to mention one of the findings that I did see as particularly worrying is that women are using their phones for a narrower range of activities, as your report shows. And I think that's something that was not previously identified. And it would be important to help us to then better target our interventions, knowing this kind of information.
Great.
And with
Thank you so much. And Also, thank you for flagging the importance of, also addressing this issue for girls. While our report focuses on women, absolutely, we also have to focus on girls, and it's, as you say, very complex, covering affordability, skills, a range of social norms, and safety and security. So thank you. Thanks for that. It would be my dream if, when I'm talking to you this time next year, when we launch our next year's report, that we're back to talking about a reducing mobile gender gap rather than a stalled one or an increasing one. So if you have, in the sort of last minute we have together, if you had just one piece of advice for this audience, of how we can make sure that happens, what would it be?
So let's make sure it happens, Claire. I would love
Yeah.
that too. That would be my dream as well. I think it's all about partnership, and that's what our Partner to Connect Digital Coalition is about. No one's going to be able to do this alone. We understand where the new challenges are, and I do think we need to build strong, solid, and sustainable collaboration and cooperation models across different stakeholder groups so that we can close the digital gender gap. And of course, Equals is a great example of an important partnership exactly on the digital gender gap.
Great. Thank you so much for your time today, and also for your real leadership on this space. It's an honor and a privilege to be working with you on this topic and to have you here. So thank you so much, Doreen, for sharing your time and your insights with us.
Well, thank you, Claire. It's always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire and Doreen, for sharing your reflections on the findings and what we all need to do. Doreen, you shared a number of points which resonated with what we've seen in our work. And in particular, you said that women need to own their own handsets, because if they only have access to a shared phone in a household, then it's likely to be the men in the house that use it the most. You said that women and girls are often the last in line when it comes to getting online, which I thought was a great soundbite. So thank you for that. Our final speaker is from an organisation that has been working very hard to ensure women have their own internet-enabled handsets. I have great pleasure in welcoming Vishaka Sehgal from Reliance Jio in India, who is Vice President and Head of Strategic Initiatives. Jio is one of our operator commitment partners who we are really proud to have worked with over the years. Jio have made a formal commitment to increase the proportion of women in their mobile internet customer base in India. And I'm delighted to hand over to Claire, who will be asking Vishaka about the situation in India and what Jio has been doing.
Vishaka, it's really great to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Claire.
So I think it's particularly great to talk to you because, especially with the interesting findings that are emerging from South Asia and India this year. As you heard, there had been a really, really fantastic news story with India really driving down the gap in an incredible way. But last year, women's mobile internet use has stayed the same while men's has continued to increase. So I'm just wondering if this resonates with what you're seeing in India, and if so, why do you think we're seeing this new trend?
Yes. First of all, Claire, I'm absolutely delighted to join you for the launch of this year's Mobile Gender Gap Report. And having worked closely with GSMA over the last few years on the Connected Women program, we know the kind of efforts that go behind all the numbers and insights that we just heard. So kudos to all of you on the report launch. Coming to your question, Claire, yes, in India, we had made substantial gains in narrowing the digital gender gap over the last few years. In fact, I would say the progress had been much better for us compared to some of the other countries in the region. For instance, if we look at the gender gap in internet usage, as a nation, we did manage to drastically reduce it from 50% to 33% between 2019 to 2020. Now, specifically, if we look at the last 1 year period, of course, there has been a massive increase in digital adoption, be it digital payments, e-commerce, teleconsultations, online education, and so many others. So there has been unprecedented growth in data traffic. On our Jio network alone, data traffic has grown from 48 billion GB in FY 2020 to more than 62 billion GB in FY 2021. So that's the kind of growth we are talking about. Having said that, I do tend to agree with you that in this period, digital adoption has been significantly higher for men in comparison to women. Just to correlate this with the findings of this year's report, for Indian men, internet usage has drastically increased from a previous level of 45% to 50%. whereas when it comes to women, it has remained stagnant at around 30%, so same as previous year. As a consequence, the mobile internet gender gap has widened from 33 to 41%. Uh, if you ask me, I would primarily attribute this to the economic fallout out of the pandemic. And unfortunately, the brunt of the fallout is felt more acutely on women due to underlying social biases and structural inequalities. When it comes to access to smartphone or internet, a male member of a household is given preference. And this intra household disparity was amplified amidst the pandemic with decline in the household incomes, leading to the widening of the gender digital divide. Even the data from our recently concluded National Family Health Survey 5 for a period of 2019 to 2021 ratifies the stark digital gender disparity that exists. As per the findings of this very important survey, only 33% of women have ever used internet compared to 57% of men. So we can see the extent of the gap. This is something which we need to take serious cognizance of. Becoming complacent or ignoring this glaring gender gap in digital access is not an option for India, which already fares low when it comes to women's participation and economic output. So we definitely need greater rigor, more focused interventions backed by the right policy framework to get more women online. But I am optimistic that if we have the collective intent and with the synchronized efforts of all stakeholders, we will be able to achieve this. And next year, we will have a better story to tell.
Great, thanks. And thanks for sharing those numbers. Our research also is indicating that COVID is having a big impact. I mean, I guess the good news is women aren't going offline. And it's great to hear that, when they are online, so many of your customers are using the internet for value. So that's great. But I completely agree with your call to action. So I know that Reliance Jio has been working to address the gender gap in India for many years very successfully. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you've been doing?
Absolutely, Claire. Jio's commitment to bridge the digital gender gap remains utmost. We have been consistently working towards addressing barriers to digital adoption for women and marginalized segments. In fact, Jio was launched with the vision of narrowing the digital divide by providing inclusive and affordable access to broadband for all. In the last few years, we have worked at an unprecedented pace to expand the 4G infrastructure across the country, including the remotest and most far-flung areas. So today, with more than 99% population reach, we have managed to address the coverage gap to a large extent. With regards to device ecosystem, we know that device affordability has been a big deterrent for internet adoption, especially for women. So it's been a constant endeavor to innovate and create an ecosystem of affordable devices. When we launched Jio Phone, it simply didn't have any precedent. In fact, nowhere in the world was a 4G feature phone made available at the price point we offered. It has surely helped us in our endeavor to get more women online. And very recently, we have launched our new Jio Phone Next in collaboration with Google. This is again a very unique and affordable entry-level smartphone tailored to the needs of Indians. Not only does it provide support for multiple Indic languages, but it also has embedded voice-first features which allow people to navigate the phone in the language of their choice. So it's made the transition to a smartphone a lot easier for users. We are already seeing so many first-time smartphone users coming onto Jio Phone Next, including women. Besides this, we have made significant headway with regards to our Women Connect India Challenge, which, as you are aware, is a program specifically aimed at bridging the digital gender gap. I'm happy to share that as part of this program, in collaboration with USAID, we have recently selected 10 organizations who will each be given considerable grants for creating innovative women-centric solutions targeted towards various women groups like women farmers, entrepreneurs, members of self-help groups, and so on. And we are aiming to reach out to 3 lakh women and girls across 17 states in the country through this program. Digital skills is another area where we have been consistently channelizing our efforts. GSMA definitely has been an important partner for us here, and we are very happy that we have completed the pilot phase of the digital skills program along with your team. So really excited for the larger rollout of the program, as it can go in a long way in addressing the prevalent usage gap amongst women. Additionally, given the diversity that we have in India, we've realized that including regional or vernacular aspects in digital offerings is a must if we have to drive adoption levels, especially in rural and local communities. So at Jio, we are consciously working to ensure that more and more of our products, applications, and digital tools support regional languages. Further, as part of our digital roadmap, we are focusing on creating compelling applications in areas of agriculture, health, livestock, GovTech, which are relevant for women, local communities, and rural segments. We've also amplified our focus on AI-based voice recognition and speech-to-text technologies, which can serve as an effective means for addressing the digital literacy barrier that disproportionately impacts women. To conclude, we are constantly exploring different means and strategies to increase digital adoption amongst women and vulnerable segments. And we are really open to new ideas and suggestions from organizations like yours on any other possible strategies that we could adopt.
Okay, that's fascinating to hear that you're taking such a holistic approach from devices to skills to language to relevant content services. Fantastic. So, as you've done a lot, you've been doing a lot. There's a big challenge still, progressed a long way in India, but there's still a ways to go. So as a final reflection, kind of what would you say are the sort of top one or two most impactful actions that we can take to address the digital gap? What would you leave this audience with? What would you say the one or two things that we can do?
Sure. Well, I have been a strong advocate of digital literacy and awareness programs for women, as we clearly see a huge gap there, particularly in rural parts of the country. So definitely that remains a very important intervention area when it comes to addressing the digital gender gap. Having said that, we also can't ignore the fact that smartphone ownership still poses a significant hurdle in internet access for women. This is evident from the findings of your report. The proportion of men owning a smartphone in India has grown from 41% to 49% over the last 1 year. But this has remained flat for women at around 25 to 26%. So looking at the extent of the device gender gap, there is a definite need to establish a framework for subsidizing devices for women who are completely left out of the digital economy. In India, we have the Universal Services Obligation Fund of the government, which so far has been focusing on plugging the network gap, particularly in rural areas. I think it's time that we broaden the mandate of the fund to include the gender dimension and channelize it to address the device affordability barrier for women. Even state governments need to look at possible models for providing free or subsidized handsets to women from low-income groups within their states. I am happy that some states in India have already taken a lead in this. For instance, Rajasthan, which is the largest state for us in terms of area, has recently announced its plan to disburse over 13.3 million free mobile handsets to women from economically weaker sections in the state. So in my opinion, such government or state-led interventions to provide handset support along with constant innovation from operators and other private sector players towards creating an ecosystem of affordable devices can go in a long way in kickstarting the digital journey for millions of women.
Great, thanks so much. I look forward to hearing about all those initiatives you mentioned, how they take shape, but fascinating. Thank you so much for your time. This is such an important topic, and you are doing so much in this area, so I really appreciate you sharing your insights and thoughts with us and giving your precious time today. Thank you so much, Vishaka.
Thank you, Claire, for having me. It was my pleasure.
Thank you so much, Vishaka and Claire. And it's truly wonderful to hear about all the incredible effort Jio is putting into solving the mobile gender gap in India, despite the many challenges out there. And I especially enjoyed hearing about all the innovative work you've been doing to reach those who find it most difficult to use a mobile phone, which, as you said, Vishaka, is likely to benefit women most of all. And ultimately, you said it's not an option for India to ignore the glaring gender gap in digital access. And it's really clear to me from today that it's not an option for any of us, whatever country we're in, because the mobile gender gap is not going to close automatically. And if we take our foot off the gas and we don't proactively take action to reach women, we're at risk of inadvertently making it worse. So let's all take away what we've learned today, work more and more together and address this mobile gender gap once and for all. And hopefully we'll be having a very different conversation next year. Thank you all so much for listening today. And a huge thank you again to all of our wonderful speakers, Mats, Matthew, Seema, Claire, Doreen, and Vishaka. And thank you to everyone at GSMA who was involved in the report, and the men and women in the field who kindly agreed to be interviewed, and our research partners and the experts who contributed. And finally, the UK, FCDO and CEDA for making all of this possible. Thank you.
I'm Alexandra Wanjiru from Kirugaya town. I sell bicycle spare parts, some hardwares. This is my own business. Actually, my hobby of riding the bicycles made me connected to the internet using the Google app, and it helped me identify some of the different types of bicycles that are there, challenged me to get some of them. COVID-19, which has been a great challenge to us because many of us were not able to open their shops. But as for us, we had the old stock, which mostly we sell online. We normally post them on Facebook. That is where we get customers' feedbacks, we communicate with our customers, we make an order and we do delivery. We also have a WhatsApp group whereby we also connect to our retailers and they give us their feedbacks. As for the payments, they have been good because we've been using mobile transactions, mostly M-Pesa, which is an awesome way of transacting.